When I was younger, I was a total mess, I admit it. Thanks to my rebelliousness and immaturity, I got into drugs and ended up in trouble with the law. In the end, I had to choose between going to jail or entering a government rehabilitation program called The Farm. The Farm, as the name implies, was a rural workplace. The owner had contacts in the upper echelons of the government and, simply put, struck a very convenient deal to get cheap labor, but only from troubled youths who were about to go to jail. Sounds pretty cruel, doesn't it? But looking back, I'm not so sure he benefited the most. I'd say it was kind of a win. Win, since for most of the kids, this was a much better option than going to prison. Of course, I can't speak entirely for the other guys, but at least for me, working there helped me a lot. Picking up trash on the side of the road is one thing, but spending time on something that really matters can do wonders for your life and transform your mind. And I found a part of me that definitely needed to change. I made friends on the farm that I still chat with on Facebook from time to time, even though we now live far away. But ultimately, it gave me discipline and confidence, which is amazing because I was sure my fate would be to end up in a baby jail, or children's jail for those unfamiliar with the term. The irony of it is that all the crazy things I did on the street were nothing compared to what I experienced on the farm. When you arrived, you were given a chore and a roommate. You could take care of livestock or crops or any other productive activity on the farm, and the roommate you were assigned was essentially your guide, your mentor, someone to help you adjust and keep you on track. These were people who had already been through the program and had been effectively rehabilitated, so they could offer real advice on how to do it. And that's how it worked with my guide, who was a great person. When it was my turn, I gladly accepted to be a mentor. I knew it was a challenge, as it was also a challenge to be in that situation in the beginning, but I was willing to give it my best shot before I got out of there and got my life back on track. Not everyone made it to the role of mentor, so for me it was a real honor and a great opportunity. I felt really valued and wanted to return the favor. So after about 9 months in the program, I had risen to the rank of livestock supervisor and had been given a 2-bedroom apartment to await the arrival of my apprentice. I knew that because of the gender rules, my apprentice was going to be a woman, but I had no idea what her attitude would be like. If she was calm and willing, it would be a walk in the park, but if we didn't get along, it could be complicated. I had already heard several horror stories about difficult apprentices leading to fights between mentors and their peers, and I didn't want to go through that. So my strategy was to build a good relationship with my new apprentice, the same thing my mentor had done with me when I arrived. The day my apprentice arrived, I was excited to meet her. I wasn't at all discouraged to see that she didn't want to be there. Almost no one is excited when they first arrive, so I took it in stride. We were in the pen, and she joined me for a few days working with the animals after her induction. At first, she was not very interested, but gradually she began to feel more comfortable and showed improvement. She was to stay with me for a month, and that time could feel like an eternity or fly by. Around the second week, it seemed that Amaya, my apprentice, was fitting in well. Although her attitude needed a lot of work, we sometimes made great strides together. One day, however, 2 policemen arrived, and I saw that they were talking to a group leader who looked very concerned. I approached with the idea of listening to what they were saying, but when the group leader saw me, he immediately called me over. It turned out that the policemen had come for something serious. They were looking for my apprentice. The cops didn't just want to talk to her, they had a warrant for her arrest in another county. This created a very tense situation because we didn't know how Amaya was going to react. She might get scared and try to escape. And the truth is that her behavior at the beginning had been a bit unpredictable. While we were thinking about that, it occurred to me that it would be better if I could talk to her before the policeman arrived, so I could tell her the bad news in a gentler way and avoid her getting scared when she saw the officers. I remember when I had been in trouble with the law, the uniforms made me very nervous, and maybe in that other life I would have run too. So I knew that all that progress I had made could fall apart in seconds if I didn't act appropriately. I decided to go to the dorms. I was pretty sure Amaya was in her room, and sure enough, I found her there, sitting on her bed. I told her that we needed to talk, and I don't think she even imagined that there was a warrant out for her arrest, because when I told her the news, she was devastated. It was a very emotional moment. She actually thought about running away before the police arrived, but despite her impulse to flee, I managed to convince her that the best thing to do was to confront the officers and find out what the warrant was about. I told her that running away would only make things worse, but what seemed to calm her down a bit was when I asked her if she was absolutely sure that she didn't know anything about the warrant. When she replied that she wasn't sure, I told her that if she really didn't remember anything unusual, meaning something serious like robbing a store or doing something violent, in the end it wouldn't be too much of a problem. Maybe it could be a missed date or a minor traffic problem. Amaya started to calm down a bit and said to me, "You're right, I don't have to be scared." I promised her that the group leaders would put in a good word for her so she could come back, so she decided to follow me to where the cops were. Amaya was only a year or two younger than me, so more than her mentor. I became her friend, and a very close bond really formed between us. That's why I really wanted to help her, and hoped that she could solve her problem with the police and return to the farm. I remember we were walking together after leaving the dorms, but when we turned the corner and the cops showed up, she suddenly turned away from me and started backing away. I saw it as a moment of doubt, but I thought we were past it. I encouraged her to keep going, but when I looked again, I noticed she was trying to do something, but before I knew it, a knife was against my throat. I was in shock for a few seconds. Feeling the coldness of the knife was one thing, but realizing it was Amaya holding it was something else entirely. It took me by surprise, and I didn't know how to react as she held me with one hand and with the other, she wielded the knife, while the policemen drew their guns and approached. She started aggressively telling me to back off, so I did as she asked, but that set my mind into overdrive. "What are you doing?" I said, as I backed up with her, but she didn't answer me. I thought she was just acting impulsively out of fear, so I tried to talk some sense into her. "Amaya, think it through. This can only complicate things for you." But she only replied, "I know what I'm doing. I'm not going to jail. I'm going to get out of here." Meanwhile, the cops were yelling for her to put the knife down, but she seemed very determined. At that point, she said in my ear in a low voice that she wouldn't hurt me and that I just needed to get out of there. I begged her to stop, that they were going to kill her, but she just yelled at me to shut up and keep walking, so I did as she said. While that whole situation was going on, a bunch of kids ran to see what was going on because they heard the yelling. As we backed up, almost shoulder to shoulder, a crowd of kids formed watching from the vicinity of the community center, and it was total chaos. I never thought Amaya really wanted to hurt me. It was a desperate act to avoid going to jail, so when we got to the trees near the cattle fields, I thought she was going to run away and escape, but that didn't happen at all. I spent a while trying to convince her to let me go, but she was too focused on keeping the cops away. She was yelling at them to stay back and turning a deaf ear to what I was telling her. But suddenly she stopped and looked at me for a moment sternly and told me to shut up. But I kept talking to her, telling her that her plan would not work, and that if the police caught her, she was going to end up in much more serious trouble. I told her that she would never manage to run away by herself in an unknown place, that the police would not take long to catch her, and if they did, she was going to face much more serious consequences. I further explained that if she went into the woods, she would not only have to deal with the cops on her tail, but also bears, wolves, and other natural dangers. These woods were teeming with wildlife, and it was almost impossible for him to get out of there alive. Although at one point she got very nervous and threatened to seriously slit my throat if I didn't shut up, deep down I was sure that she didn't really intend to hurt me. She was just scared because she knew I was going to jail. Probably the order was more serious than she had said. However, and to my utter surprise, when we reached the edge of the forest, she pulled my hair back, yelled at me to forgive her, and plunged the knife into my neck. It all happened in a millisecond. She sharpened the knife and made the first cut, intending to slide it into my neck and murder me. But the cop's action was instantaneous. Although I remember the moment in slow motion, the truth is that at the same instant I felt the knife press into my flesh, I heard the burst of the shot, and almost simultaneously, Amaya's blood splashing on my face. The shot had been fatal. It had hit her right in the head. It took me a second to process what had happened, but the moment I turned around and saw Amaya lying there with a hole in her forehead, I started screaming like crazy, not knowing if I had been hurt or how bad it was. The cut on my neck was slight, but hysteria invaded me completely. More for her than for me. I knelt down and tried to shake her, hoping she could survive. But seeing that fixed look in her eyes, I understood that there was nothing left to do. I can't explain in words what I feel every time I think of Amaya. I know she could have killed me, and I know she had the intention, but I can't help feeling sorry for her. I don't hold a grudge. Rather, it makes me very sad that she made such a terrible decision. She was only 16 years old and had a whole life to straighten her path. But instead, she committed a stupidity that ended her life and almost mine. In the end, she was only going to face a shoplifting charge. After that incident, I decided to give up mentoring and left the farm. I still feel very grateful to that place and all the people there, and also for the opportunity they gave me, but I really couldn't stay in that place after that traumatic event. Fortunately, the cut on my neck was minimal and I didn't need more than a couple of stitches and some iodine, but definitely, the psychological and emotional wound was much deeper and harder to heal. It was a sunny Saturday and Alex, my best friend and roommate, and I decided to go to our trusted furniture store in the suburbs because we needed some new furniture for our living room and their things were priced very low, almost ridiculously low, which is why we had bought most of our apartment furniture there. We were excited to see what good deals we could find as we walked around the store. However, I noticed how strangely quiet it was. Even though there were lots of displays and furniture, there were hardly any customers around. It was as if we had the store all to ourselves. We didn't manage to find exactly what we wanted, so a bit disappointed, we started heading towards the exit. But at that moment, something caught my eye. A small door with no badges on it. I looked at Alex and said, "Do you want to check it out?" He shrugged and we decided to explore. So we opened the door and discovered a dimly lit staircase leading down to what appeared to be a basement. As we descended, we noticed that the air was damp and cold, which made me shiver. Alex took my arm and asked me if I was sure I wanted to go on. I said yes, because I was itching with curiosity. I wanted to see where that staircase led, so we started down. When we reached the bottom, we found ourselves in a long, narrow hallway with concrete walls. There were no windows or other doors in sight, and the only light was from flickering fluorescent bulbs hanging above us. It was strange and I was getting more and more curious, but Alex was starting to get restless and wanted to go back. As we walked along, I began to sense that something wasn't right. There was an eerie atmosphere, but I couldn't figure out exactly what it was. Now I understood why Alex was so restless. I could really feel the atmosphere getting heavy. Alex suggested that we go back immediately, but despite everything, I wanted to keep going. Now I was very intrigued, and I had to find out what secret was hidden under the tent and why that door was there. We continued a little further, and as we turned a corner, we stood completely still. In front of us was a group of men dressed in black and with their faces covered by balaclavas, and they clearly did not seem to have friendly intentions. We tried to hide, but it was too late. They had already seen us. Fear ran through my whole body and I froze. Alex was just as scared as I was, and when I met his gaze, he looked at me with accusatory eyes. I couldn't say anything, but I knew it was my fault we were in that situation. The only thing we could think to do was to raise our hands, showing that we were not a threat. At that, one of the men from that group approached us and, in a harsh voice, asked us what we were doing down there. It was absurd to say that we were lost, so we said nothing. Then the man looked us up and down and said that we had trespassed on his property and that we could not just leave. Then he signaled one of the other men to take us to his boss, and that terrified us. I realized that the situation was much more serious than it seemed, especially after the men grabbed us roughly and dragged us down the hallway. We had no choice but to follow them, having no idea what they wanted from us, and after what seemed like an eternity, we arrived at a large metal door and were pushed inside. I couldn't believe it. The room was huge and full of stolen stuff. TVs, computers, jewelry. It looked like it was straight out of a thieves' movie. In the center of the room was the boss, an older guy with a shaved head and a thick beard. He looked us up and down with a cold look, as if he was weighing what to do with us, and asked us what we were doing there. But I decided to stay silent, because I was between fear and disbelief. What was going to happen to us now that we had discovered his little secret? I didn't even want to think about the answer to that question. The boss settled back in his chair and with a mischievous expression said, "I don't think they'll be leaving anytime soon." Alex stepped forward and replied, "What do you mean? We didn't do anything wrong." Then the man let out a derisive laugh. "You're in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't know if you've noticed, but you're in no position to demand anything." He then signaled his men to lock us in. I realized we were in big trouble. We were trapped in a criminal's lair just because we had decided to explore a mysterious door in a furniture store in a suburb of the city. That made me think that maybe the store was just a front to hide those mobsters' shady dealings in plain sight. The men led us into a small, dark, dank room. The only light came from a tall barred window, and there was no furniture or bed, just a cold, hard concrete floor. Alex and I huddled in a corner trying to find some warmth. I couldn't believe this was happening. It seemed like a nightmare, but it was all too real. "Now what are we going to do?" whispered Alex, very scared. I shook my head and replied, "I don't know, but we have to find a way out of here." We started checking every corner of the room, hoping to find something that could help us escape, but there was nothing. No hidden doors, no loose bricks, no nothing. We were trapped. As we stood in silence, I heard footsteps approaching. Then the door creaked open and the boss came in, accompanied by 2 of his henchmen. He approached us with a serious expression and said, "We need you to help us with our next hit, and if it goes wrong, well, you won't get out of here alive." We were being led down the hallway again, and the situation was getting more tense. Then we walked for what seemed like an eternity, as if we were in the bowels of a monster, until finally, we came to a huge metal door. Alex and I looked at each other. We knew we had to do something, but we had no idea how to get out of there. But suddenly, we started to hear noises behind us. Immediately, everyone became alert and drew their guns. That's when we heard them shouting from the hallway, "Police, you're surrounded. Come out with your hands up." At that moment, the guys looked at each other and all at the boss, waiting for his signal to act. He shook his head from side to side in denial, and then pointed towards the metal door. The men nodded and opened the door and rushed in there. I thought they would force us to go in with them, but instead they left us in the hallway. Alex and I wasted no time and walked out with our hands up, telling the cops that we were innocent. When we got to where they were, they looked us up and down, and we briefly told them what had happened to us. After that, a couple of officers took us outside and we stayed in custody in one of the patrol cars. What happened in there I can't describe in detail because I wasn't there to see it, but there was no shooting, no confrontation. What we do know is that that door apparently led to an exit through which the men managed to escape. After that, Alex and I were taken to the station and questioned separately, and after a couple of hours having corroborated our stories, they realized we had nothing to do with it and let us go. I never knew what happened to those men. I don't know if they were ultimately caught, but I do know that they raided the store and recovered a lot of stolen stuff. In addition, it was also known to be a center of operations for other types of illicit activities such as arms and substance trafficking. In the end, Alex and I ended up buying our furniture online. We really didn't feel like going back to a furniture store ever again. This happened at the end of the summer of 2016. To give a little context, my boyfriend Stuart and I were in our early 20s and sharing an apartment with another married couple. They were great, but unfortunately for us, Florida wasn't what they wanted. So they decided to move to San Francisco. So Stuart and I started looking for new roommates because the rent was pretty high and we didn't want to take on all the expenses. We lived in a nice area, but a little bit out of town, which made a lot of people who said they would come to see the place back out at the last minute. Finally, we were contacted by this girl named Alicia, who was Stuart's high school classmate and was interested in finding a place to live with her boyfriend Tom. She was a sweet, kind girl and seemed like a nice person. Now I have this sort of intuition to sense people's energy when I meet them, and from the beginning I didn't feel that same good vibe with Tom. I don't consider myself a critic, but inside I knew something wasn't right with this guy. But despite my doubts, I decided not to judge and give them the benefit of the doubt, since Stuart trusted her and I had no major reason to disagree. However, it soon became apparent that Tom was a troubled guy. It had barely been a few days since they moved in, and Tom started making a lot of noise, inviting friends over to smoke weed until 4 a.m. and playing the music so loud it sounded like he was in our own room. He was quite disrespectful, especially to me, as more than once he made inappropriate advances to me. But the worst part was that Stuart did nothing about it, and on one hand I was relieved, because I knew it would be a direct conflict between them. Tom was about 23, but he acted like he was 14. We later found out that he had a police record for theft and other things. He even threatened me several times, which was scary since I was just a 20-year-old girl trying to get along with everyone. But this was just a little bit of context I wanted to give you about Tom to make it easier to understand what's coming next. It was a Tuesday night and I got home around 7:30 in the evening. As I walked up the stairs, almost reaching the 3rd floor, I saw Tom leaving the apartment in a rather strange attitude. But I didn't want to say anything because we didn't like each other, so I ignored him and went on my way. But he started yelling at me, asking me to look inside the apartment, and when I peeked my head out, I didn't see anything strange. So I asked him what he was talking about. Then, in an angry voice, he said that he had been robbed and that he had just come home and discovered that. However, all the furniture was in its place, so I didn't understand what was going on. Upon entering, I noticed that my Wii U console was missing, but the rest of my consoles were there. At this point, I was becoming more and more suspicious of him, but I tried to stay calm and called Stuart to see how far away he was. Usually we would arrive at about the same time, so I decided to call. But Tom started yelling at me again. He told me he had called the police and they were on their way. With those words, I knew he had probably been in the apartment for a while and had already had time to hide all his weird stuff. It wasn't long, and the police arrived, just as Stuart was coming home as well. So one officer went upstairs with my boyfriend and Tom to check what was missing, while another stayed downstairs with me. We were chatting and I started to hear what had happened. It turns out that a lot of our stuff was missing, but Tom was only missing his PS4. So I asked the officer if I could search Tom's car and also told him that if he needed to check Stuart's car or mine, no problem. The officer said there was no need to check our cars, but he agreed to check Tom's car. When everyone came down, they asked Tom if they could search his car and asked for his ID. He said yes, but first he needed to go inside to get his ID and keys to the apartment. So Stuart and I followed him upstairs and watched him take out his wallet and keys before leaving the apartment. We didn't want to be nosy, so we decided to stay home while the police checked his car. A few minutes passed and he still wasn't back, so we started looking for him in the neighborhood, but of course he had already disappeared. How convenient. Since he agreed to have his car searched and never objected, the police went ahead and checked to see if it was unlocked. And guess what? We found all our stuff inside. There was our 3 Seconds console, PS4 controller, STW's laptop, several Wii U games, our tablets, and even cash. The next morning, I decided I had to act. I had had enough, and I was not going to tolerate any more this guy, who besides being a troublemaker and disrespectful was a thief. So I threw all his stuff next to the dumpster and told Alicia that if she wanted to stay, it would be without him. But she decided to leave, not without first apologizing for the trouble caused. I told her that it wasn't her fault, but that I never wanted to see her boyfriend near my house again. I then called a locksmith to change our locks. I thought about getting a restraining order against Tom, but in the end I didn't go for it. I really didn't think it would be necessary because I didn't think he would dare come back after what he did. However, a few weeks later, we saw his car parked right next to our building, but we decided to pretend we didn't see it. We just watched him from our apartment, with 911 ready just in case. Fortunately, in the end, he just drove off without causing any more trouble. But I really hope I never run into Tom again. Hi, my name is Cynthia, and although I'm 37 years old now, I will never forget a scary experience I had when I was a senior in high school at 17. At that time, I was a pretty invisible girl at school. I only had my friend Mateo, who was always by my side since freshman year. But the truth is, deep down, I always wanted to be part of the cool kids. Ever since I started school, those 6 boys and girls who formed the most popular group seemed to me to be the best. They were 4 girls and 2 boys who had it all. They were good-looking, smart, popular, and didn't lack money. Although our school was public, everyone envied them, and I personally always dreamed of being part of them, but being a normal girl and, well, poor. I knew that was almost impossible. That was my longing since I entered high school, but it was never achieved. So by my senior year, I had already let go of that illusion. But one day, everything changed. I was chatting with Mateo in the cafeteria, enjoying our breakfast, when one of the popular girls, Jessica, walked up to us and my jaw dropped. She had black hair and skin so pale she looked otherworldly. She greeted me and asked if we could talk alone. I looked at Mateo and he just nodded, because even though I never told him I wanted to join that group, he knew it by the way I looked at them. I told him I'd be right back and sat down with Jessica at another table, and as soon as we sat down, I asked her to tell me what she wanted. As I was so close to her, I felt a strange vibe, kind of dark, like I was in a horror movie. But I thought it was normal to be nervous. She told me that one of her friends was moving out of town, and so she was leaving school. Since they were used to 6 of them, they wanted to know if I wanted to spend the next day's recess with them, and she assured me that they thought I was really cool and wanted to be friends with me. I couldn't believe it. Did they really think I was cool? It was like a dream come true, so I said yes without thinking. Jessica smiled, but there was something about that smile that didn't quite convince me. After talking to her, I was excited and couldn't wait to tell Mateo. However, when I told him, his reaction threw me off. Instead of being happy, he looked at me with a disappointed face and a dull smile. He warned to be careful with those guys because he had heard weird rumors about them. Certainly there were rumors that the popular group was involved in weird things, as if they were part of some cult or something. And thinking about it, that explained why they seemed to have so much money, even though they came from normal families. Besides, they all seemed to have the same half-Gothic dark style, but I always thought it was just a matter of purely aesthetic. Mateo told me that on weekends they went to the best bars in town, wore designer clothes, ate at expensive restaurants, and splurged cash like it was nothing. He suspected they might be doing something illegal because it wasn't normal for kids our age to live like that. Although I knew my friend was somewhat right in what he was saying, I decided to ignore him and change the subject. I had a hard time accepting that there was something shady going on behind that group I had admired so much. He just rolled his eyes and let the subject go, but he seemed concerned about me. Despite what Mateo was telling me, I couldn't help but feel excited about the opportunity to spend time with the populars. Inside me, I thought that maybe that was what I needed to change my life and finally be part of that world I had always dreamed of. But I couldn't help but remember what my friend had said, and the weird feeling I felt when I was around Jessica. I still decided to move on, thinking that maybe they were just rumors and there was nothing to worry about. However, deep down, a voice was telling me to be careful. That afternoon, after the talk with Jessica, I kept imagining what it would be like to be part of that cool group. And I couldn't help but imagine going out with them to amazing parties and being admired and envied by everyone at school. But I also had my fears. I was terrified that when they realized I didn't have as much money as them or that I wasn't as cool, they would stop talking to me. But after thinking about it, I decided I should give them a chance. I was also worried about leaving Mateo alone. It really hurt to think that my friendship with him might be affected. But deep down, I knew this was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. That night I had a hard time sleeping. The excitement of sitting with them the next day had me tossing and turning. It's so crazy how much importance we place on such silly things at that age. When I finally fell into a deep sleep, I had a weird, creepy dream. Jessica appeared dressed in black in a dark place, took my hand and with a box cutter cut her palm and then did the same to me, letting droplets of blood fall. Then she intertwined our hands and it looked like we were making a blood pact, smiling that same fake smile she had shown me before. The atmosphere was so tense that it made me uncomfortable, and when I woke up I felt very scared and confused about what I had dreamed, but I tried to think it was just because I was overthinking everything. Still, the fear was still in my chest as I got ready to go to school. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had dreamed. Could it have some weird meaning? When I arrived at school, I was nervous and excited at the same time, my heart racing. I was walking through the halls looking for the popular group, feeling a knot in my stomach. Every time I saw them, the image of Jessica popped into my mind, and that only increased my anxiety. My friend Mateo seemed strange that day. He was distant and preoccupied, as if he sensed something was wrong. I tried to talk to him, assuring him that everything was going to be okay, but I felt that something was changing between us. It was as if little by little an invisible wall was rising between me and him. But I told myself that I had to continue with my plan to get closer to the populars, trying to ignore the doubts that were filling my head. I really was obsessed with being a part of them, and now that I think about it, as an adult, it was such a sick thing. Time passed slowly, and every minute felt eternal as I waited for recess. My thoughts were in a back and forth between excitement, fear, and worry for Mateo, but I tried to calm myself and convinced myself that everything was okay. And when the time finally came, a mixture of anxiety and excitement washed over me from head to toe. As I made my way to the cafeteria, I saw the popular people at a table in the distance as if they were waiting for me. Then Jessica raised her hand and waved at me, signaling that they were there. Even though it seemed like a friendly gesture, a wave of fear ran through me. It was weird, but still, with my heart pounding, I started to approach them. With each step, the fear grew, as if something dark was warning me of the danger ahead. My legs seemed heavier and the path to them felt endless, as if I was trying to escape at the same time. When I reached the table, the atmosphere was strange. In that instant, the noise of the cafeteria faded away, leaving an eerie, heavy silence enveloping us. It was as if the sunlight was coming in dimmer, as if the shadows were swallowing the light. When I finally sat down, I tried to act natural, but the fear inside me was growing. The boys looked at me with weird expressions, as if they knew something I didn't, and their faces looked paler and emptier than ever, as if they were missing something. Suddenly, Jessica started talking, but her voice sounded strange, like it was coming from far away, and I felt more and more anxious. As the conversation continued, I noticed that the boys spoke in a weird tone, which gave me the creeps. The objects around us seemed to move strangely, as if they had a life of their own. The chairs squeaked and twisted, giving the impression of being trapped in a bad dream. The shadows on the walls seemed to lengthen, taking on strange shapes that watched me. It was too strange what I was experiencing, but I thought I was just too nervous and hallucinating things. So even though fear gripped me, I tried to go ahead and participate in the talk, but every word I said seemed to make everything darker. I felt as if I was sinking into an endless abyss, caught in a whirlwind of fear and unpleasant sensations that I didn't understand why they were happening to me. The atmosphere at the table felt increasingly heavy and strange, as if I were in a different dimension. Suddenly, everything started spinning around me, and I felt completely dizzy and lost. My vision was a mess, and the voices of my new friends sounded strange, like echoes in the distance. The atmosphere at the table felt so dense and heavy that I had the impression I was going to lose control at any moment. But just at that instant, one of the guys, Max, gave a loud clap right in front of me, staring at me. As if by magic, the dizziness went away and everything went back to normal. It was as if a dark cloud had suddenly dissipated, and now everything was normal, as if nothing had happened. I thought maybe the juice I had been drinking was bad or something, because it had been a really crazy feeling just a moment ago. The others seemed to act as if nothing had happened, talking about fashion, Jessica's new dress, and their plans for the weekend. They mentioned that they were going to an amazing party, and then off into the woods to see the full moon. Suddenly, they all looked at me at the same time, as if they had planned it, and with smiles on their faces, they invited me to join them for the party and the hike into the woods, telling me it would be a lot of fun. Although I felt a little unsure, I decided to accept the invitation, trying to ignore those little alarms in my head. However, as I took a better look at them, I noticed that their faces looked somewhat pale and tired, as if something inside them had dampened their energy. Their eyes had a strange, almost mischievous gleam in them, but still, I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. The conversation continued, but my mind couldn't stop thinking about the weird sensations I had been having and how unsettling my new friends looked. And although I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, the truth was that I still wondered if it was really a good idea to join them in their nighttime adventures, especially after the warnings Matthew had given me and that disturbing dream I had the night before. As recess drew to a close, the laughter of my friends had a weird, almost macabre tone, echoing in my head like a chorus of shadows, which left me with an uneasy feeling creeping into my bones. And when recess was finally over, I said goodbye to them and they went off to their classes. Their smiles didn't seem very sincere to me, and something about them made me uncomfortable, but come on, I knew the world of Popular was like that, frivolous but cool. At that moment, I got up from my chair, but as I looked at my reflection in a window, I noticed that my own smile also looked dull, lacking its usual sparkle. I stared at my own reflection for a moment, noticing that something in me was also changing. Not only my outfit, which was now a little more similar to their style, something a little emo. Remember that in those years that dark aura was very fashionable. So I told myself that it was just that the change of look and makeup made me look a little dull like them. But that was great, wasn't it? I shook off those confusing thoughts and went out to find Matteo. I sat with him in the living room and told him everything that had happened at recess, how I had felt dizzy and scared for no reason, and how everything was suddenly back to normal. He listened to everything with concern, and his expression showed that, unlike me, he was not taking what I said lightly. Matthew suggested that maybe someone had put something in my juice because what had happened didn't feel right. He recommended that I not go to the party on Saturday, arguing that the whole thing felt weird and that it didn't make sense for them to be looking for me with so many other girls at school. Although at one point I was annoyed by his words, deep down, I knew he was right. However, the desire to be part of that group and live the life of the popular ones was so strong that I decided to ignore all of his warnings. I convinced myself that my fears were absurd and that everything would be fine if I just relaxed and enjoyed this thing that had been my dream for years. As the week went on, I moved further and further away from Matteo and closer to the popular ones, unaware of the shadow that was looming over me. During the week, even though I would pass my group of friends in the halls and we would share laughs and jokes, there was always a strange, nagging feeling hovering in the back of my mind. The nights were getting harder and harder. It was as if my dreams decided to play a practical joke on me, and the nightmares were horrible. Jessica and the others would turn into monstrous creatures that would chase me, trying to devour my soul. What madness. On Friday night, just before the weekend when I was going to the party and into the woods with the populars, I decided to talk to Matteo again. I wanted to apologize for leaving him aside and tell him what was going on with me, wanting his support and wisdom because he was a pretty mature person for his age, unlike me. We met at a cafe near our houses, and the first thing I noticed was how tired and haggard he looked. I wondered if he had been worrying about me all this time and if the distance he had put between us had affected our friendship. Seeing him like that really filled me with guilt. So I hugged him before we sat down and asked him if something was wrong, but he only said that he was struggling with math and hadn't slept well, but nothing more. So without further ado, I shared with him my fears, the nightmares that were tormenting me, and that constant discomfort I felt every time I was with the populars. Matteo listened to me carefully and his face reflected a lot of concern and sadness, and after an uncomfortable silence, he advised me to think carefully about what I was going to do, and that if at any moment I felt bad or in danger, I should not hesitate to get away from them and return home to go back to being the friends we were before. I nodded, thanking him for his concern and promising that I would take his advice into account. As we said our goodbyes, we each went home, but the restlessness continued to grow inside me. That night I tried to sleep early, preparing for the chaos of the weekend ahead, but sleep did not bring me the relief I had hoped for, but more nightmares that haunted me until dawn. In my dreams, I was trapped in a dark and frightening place. Everything was an uncomfortable silence and the air stank, as if I was surrounded by death. In the midst of the darkness, I could see many candles illuminating a strange altar covered with weird symbols, and as I got closer, I noticed that the altar was covered in what looked like fresh blood, which was falling in a puddle on the floor. In the center, there was a large open book, made of something that resembled human skin, and the letters appeared to be written in blood. The symbols in the book called out to me as if it wanted me to read them aloud, so I did. But as I began to recite the words, an indescribable terror came over me, and the air grew heavier and heavier. The candles began to burn with blue flames, and the shadows transformed into grotesque figures. I felt that dark and ancient beings were hiding, watching me, waiting for me to fall into their trap. At that moment, the folk appeared, dressed in black robes and masks that hid their faces. They began to chant in a strange language, holding objects covered with symbols and red spots. I realized that I was trapped in a witchcraft ritual and my soul was about to be offered to beings from beyond. Who knows what kind of evil entities? I tried to run, but my legs did not respond, and when I wanted to scream, I could not make a sound. They continued with their ritual, and a dark energy began to build up around me, trapping me in a whirlwind of terror. I felt that darkness creeping into me, devouring my soul and leaving me empty. That night I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding after the nightmare. The dark images were still fresh in my mind, but I decided not to give them any importance. I thought they were just things of my imagination and that I shouldn't worry about silly things. So, in spite of everything, I prepared for the party with my new friends, and if everything went well, maybe afterwards I would go to the forest with them. I made a promise. If anything went wrong, I would look for Matteo. At 8 p.m., I arrived at the party. The place was full of elegant people, but there was something in their looks that made me a little uneasy. But as always, I tried to ignore that feeling and just enjoy the night. I let myself go, drank more than I should have, and had a great time, relieved to think that maybe I had overdone it all because of my fears. When the clock struck 12, I told my friends I was leaving because my parents would worry. However, they insisted that I accompany them to the woods, and, under the effects of alcohol and excitement, I eventually gave in. However, when we arrived, my heart stopped. There was an altar there, exactly like the one in my nightmare. Then I turned to look at them, and they smiled and looked at each other, then asked me to take their hands and form a circle around the altar. Frankly, I didn't know what to do. I hesitated for a moment, but then Jessica smiled at me and gestured for me to join as if it was nothing. So I agreed, even though everything inside me was screaming at me to run away. They began reciting words in a language I didn't understand while the black sails burned around us. The wind was blowing hard and the atmosphere was getting thicker and darker. Suddenly, it dawned on me that I was in a witch's coven, just like in my dream. And if everything I was seeing was like in my nightmare, then what would come next I had already seen. At that moment, something sparked inside me, and I realized the mistake I was making. Suddenly, fear invaded me, and in a rush of adrenaline, I let go of my friend's hands and started to run. But I didn't get very far as one of the guys caught up with me. He stopped me and told me not to be so foolish. If I wanted to have money, beauty, and power, I had to join his group. He explained to me that Satan, the true King of Kings, according to him, had appeared in the dream of one of the girls and had told them that I was the chosen one. That's why they were looking for me. When I heard the word Satan, fear came over me, and that helped me to regain my clarity. I let go of their grip and immediately ran like never before towards the road. Luckily, a woman passing by in her car saw me signaling to stop and pulled over to take me home. I could barely speak, and when I finally arrived, I burst into tears. My parents hugged me and my mom stayed with me that night to make sure I was okay, but I didn't tell them what had really happened. I just made up a story about how I drank too much and threw up in front of everything and that it embarrassed me. To them, it logically seemed like I was exaggerating, but they still comforted me. I couldn't tell them the truth. That could only make things worse. The next day, I went to see Mateo and told him everything. He took me to a spiritual guide who lived near his house, and he cleansed my energy and promised me that those witches and the evil entities that accompanied them would never come near me again, and luckily they did. My name is Priya and I grew up in Dhaka, Bangladesh. From the outside, our life seemed perfect. I was born into a well-to-do Muslim family and we always lived together, surrounded by cousins and uncles. Our house was in a quiet neighborhood, full of laughter, the smell of traditional food, and the hustle and bustle of everyday life. I had two closest cousins, a boy and a girl, and we used to play and keep each other company all the time. However, the story I want to tell you is not as simple and cute as that. It happened at a time in my life when I was in high school, full of dreams, ambitions, and a group of loyal friends whom I loved dearly. My best friend was Irfan, a charismatic boy with an ego so dense you could almost touch it. We met in elementary school, and along the way our friendship became, shall we say, complicated. He had that kind of personality that attracted everyone, but behind that smile hid a very possessive and controlling side that began to worry me. Everything changed one day, one warm afternoon, when Irfan, who was visibly nervous, decided to go one step further in our friendship. And when I say one step further, I mean he proposed to me in my own home. I was dumbfounded. I didn't know how to answer him. He was a nice guy to me, but marrying him was the last thing I wanted at that moment, so I tactfully turned him down. I didn't expect him to take it so badly, but his reaction was completely out of proportion. He got so angry that I started to feel afraid of him. His reaction made it clear to me that he wasn't willing to accept my turning him down. Basically, the only thing he lacked was to take a swing at me. In the middle of it all, my cousin, seeing the situation, stepped between us and punched him in the arm, telling him to stay away from me. I thought that would be the end of the story, but it wasn't. After that, Irfan became even more obsessive, trying to get close to me again, even after what had happened. One winter night, I was at home with my cousins. Although there is no snow in Dhaka, the nights can be quite cold, so we gathered on the second floor, where there was an atmosphere of fun and games. My cousins and I were drinking some juice while watching Korean dramas, something I loved. I was always the last one to go to sleep because staying up watching those series was one of my little guilty pleasures. Not that it's frowned upon in my religion either. That night, I stayed up late as usual. I used to lock all the doors and windows before I went to sleep, especially since I like to feel safe. At about 3 a.m., I was awakened by a strange noise coming from my window. It was a high-pitched sound, as if someone was trying to open it. I got up slowly, trying to remember if I had left everything properly secured, and when I looked out the window, I couldn't believe it. There was Irfan, standing right outside. I knew he must be hiding from the security cameras surrounding the house, and my heart stopped for a moment when I saw him jump onto my balcony. I was in shock, and my mind filled with terror. He was not just a former friend. He was now a threat to me. In an instant, I saw him begin to cut the glass door to my balcony with a glass cutter, and in that instant, panic and adrenaline took over. I couldn't just stand there paralyzed, so I ran out of my room and locked the door. I had to do something, so I picked up my brother's gun, which I always kept locked away for safety, and held it trembling in my hands. I woke my cousin and told her to call our parents and my aunt and uncle who lived in the same building. I couldn't let Irfan into the house. I had to catch him. I knew his ego was immense, and in his mind he was not going to give up easily on me. He had already stated that he would rather be in jail than leave without fulfilling his goal, and fulfilling his goal could mean many things. While my cousin called the police, my uncle and father arrived in a matter of minutes, as they had the apartment just upstairs from us. My male cousins, who were returning from a party later that night, were met with a tense scene. Irfan was at the gates of our home, and even under the pressure of the police arriving, he seemed determined to move on. But the police finally arrived and began to check out the situation. I was too scared and didn't know what would happen. Irfan didn't dare go in, but he was there, waiting, as if he thought he could intimidate us, or what do I know. At this point, I didn't know what was going on in that guy's head. It was crazy what he was doing, and any sane being he would have just left. When my cousins arrived, they gave him warning, and finally the police caught them. But instead of facing charges, Irfan was taken to a mental health facility, as his behavior was erratic and he seemed to have serious problems. Violence and obsession are not something to be ignored, and all of us were relieved that the situation had not escalated further. After that, I heard no more from him, but a mutual friend told me a couple of years later that he had come out of rehab and moved in with his parents in Turkey. I am really glad that was the case, and I hope with all my heart that he is still doing well. But for me, that was one of the scariest episodes of my life.